Chapter 12. About St. Blaise's Mass, they had a guest at Hestviken whom they had never thought to see here. Steinfinnsons came to the manor one day. Olav was not at home, and the housefolk did not expect him till after the holy day. Olav had a happy look that evening when he came in with his friend. Arnvid had gone out to meet him on the hill. He received the ale bowl which Ingunn brought, drank to the other, and bade him welcome. But then he saw that Ingunn had been weeping. Arnvid told him he had brought her heavy tidings. Tora of Berg had died in the autumn. But when Olav heard that Arnvid had already been here for some days, he wondered a little. Had she wept over her sister for all that time? They had not been so very closely attached. But, after all, she was her only sister, and maybe at this time her tears flowed more readily than usual. Ingunn bade them good night as soon as supper was over. She took Eirik with her and went out. She would lie in the little women's house tonight. "You two would rather sleep together, I think. You must have many things to speak of." Olav could not help wondering again. Was there any special thing that she thought they wished to speak of so privily? For otherwise she might simply have lain in the closet. After that their talk went but sluggishly as they sat at their drink. Arnvid spoke of Tora's children. It was a great pity they were all under age. Olav asked after Arnvid's own sons. Arnvid said he had joy of them. Magnus had Mickelbo now. He was married, and Steinar was betrothed. Finn had taken vows in the convent of the preaching friars. They said he had good parts, and next year they would surely send him to Paris, to the great school there. "You never thought of marrying again?" asked Olav. Arnvid shook his head. He fixed his strange dark eyes upon his friend, smiling feebly and bashfully like a young man who speaks of his sweetheart. "I too shall be found among the friars, once Steinar's wedding is over." "You are not one to change your mind either," said Olav with a little smile. "Either?" said Arnvid involuntarily. "So you will be father and son in the same convent?" "Yes." Arnvid gave a little laugh. "If God wills it. It may be so turned up and down with us that I shall obey my boy and call him father." They sat in silence for a while. Then Arnvid spoke again. "It is on the convent's business we are now come south, Brother Vigard and I. We would like to rebuild our church of stone after the fire, but Bishop Thorstein has other uses for his craftsmen this year. So we were to see whether we can hire stonemasons in Oslo. But Brother Vigard said that you must do him a kindness and come into the town, and bring Ingunn with you if you could, so that he might see you. Ingunn is not fit for any journey, you may guess that. But he must be as old as the hills now, Brother Vigard." "Oh, aye, 3.50, I believe. He is sacristan now. And it was that I was to say to you that you must not fail to come. There was something he must needs say to you." Arnvid looked down and spoke with a slight effort. "About that axe of yours, the barbed axe. He has found out a great deal about it, that it is the same one that was once at Differen, in Raumarik, at the time your ancestors held the manor." "I know it," replied Olav. "Yes, Brother Vigard has heard a whole saga about that axe, he says. In former times it was the way with it, they say, that it sang for a slaying." Olav nodded. "I have heard that once myself," he said quietly. "That day when I was in the guest house ready to fare northward. You know, The last time I visited you at Micklebow?" Arnvid was silent for a while. Then he said in a low voice, "You told me that you had lost your axe on that journey." "You take me for such a fool as to set out through the forest with that huge devil of an axe?" Olaf laughed coldly. "It was a woodcutter's axe. It served me well enough, that one. But true it is, I heard Kinfetch ring. She would have fain gone with me." Arnvid sat with his arms crossed before him, perfectly silent. Olaf had got up and walked uneasily about the hall. Then he came to a sudden stop. Aloud, and as though defiantly, he asked, "Was there no one who wondered? Was nothing rumoured when that Tiet Halsen disappeared from Hamar so abruptly?" "Oh, something was said about the matter, no doubt. But folk were satisfied that he must have been afraid of the Steinfinnsons." "And you? Did you never wonder what became of him?" Arnvid said quietly, "It is not easy for me to answer that, Olaf." "I am not afraid to hear what you thought." "Why do you wish me to say it?" whispered Arnvid reluctantly. Olaf was silent a good while. When he spoke, it was as though he weighed every word. He did not look at his friend meanwhile. "I can guess Ingunn has told you how it has gone with us. I thought it must be because he would that I should offer atonement to the boy for the man I put out of the world." "That vagabond!" Olaf gave a little laugh. "He was mad enough to imagine he would marry Ingunn. Keep her and the child, he said. I had to put him out of the way. You can see that?" "I can see that you thought you had to," replied Arnvid. "Well, he struck first. It was not that I decoyed the fellow into an ambush. He came of himself, stuck to me like a burr. I was to help him, as a man buys a marriage for his leman when he would be rid of her." Arnvid said nothing. Olaf went on hotly. "That's what this man said, a man of his sort. He said it of Ingunn." Arnvid nodded. Nothing was said between them for a while. Then Arnvid spoke with hesitation. "They found the bones of a man among the ashes when they came up in the spring, my tenant of Sandvold. Those satyrs up there on Lurasen. That must have been him." "Oh, the devil! Was it your hut?" That is well so far. Now I can make amends to you for it." "Oh no, Olaf, stop." Arnvid rose abruptly, and his face contracted. "What is the sense of that? So many long years ago." "That is so, Arnvid, and every day I have thought of it, and never have I spoken of it to any living soul until this evening." "Then he was given Christian burial?" "Yes." "Then I don't have to grieve over that. I need not have vexed myself with that for all these years. That may be he was still lying there. I have not that sin upon me, that I left a Christian corpse unburied. And no one asked or made search who it might be that lay there?" "No." "That seems strange." "Oh, not so strange either. The folk up there are wont to do as I say, when for once I let them know my will." "But you should not have done that." Olaf wrung his hands hard. "It would have been better for me if it had come to light then, if you had not helped me to carry out my purpose, hush the matter up. That you could lend your hand to such a thing, you, a God-fearing man." Arnvid burst out laughing all at once, laughed so that he had to sit down on the bench. Olaf gave a start at the way the other took it. He said heatedly, "That ugly habit of yours. bursting into a roar of laughter, just as one is speaking of other things. You will have to give that up, I think, when you are a monk. I suppose I must. Arnvid dried his eyes with his sleeve. Olaf spoke in violent agitation. You have never known what it is to live at enmity with Christ, to stand before him as a liar and a betrayer every time you enter his house. I have, every day, for, it will soon be 8 years now. Hereabouts they believe me to be a pious man, for I give to the church and to the convent in Oslo and to the poor, as much as I am able. I go to Mass as often as I have the means to come there, and 2 or 3 times a day when I am in the town. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy mind and all thy heart, we are told. I think God must know I do so. I did not know that such love was within the power of man until I myself had abandoned his covenant and lost him. Why do you say this to me? Asked Arnvid in distress. You ought rather to speak to your priest of such things. I cannot do that. I have never made confession that I slew Teet. As he received no reply, he said hotly, Answer me! Can you not give me counsel? It is a great thing you lay upon me. I can give you no other counsel than that which your priest would give you. I can give you no other counsel than that you know yourself. And that is not the counsel you wish for, he said a moment later, as the other stood silent. I cannot. Olaf's face turned white, as though congealed. I must think of Ingunn too, more than of myself. I cannot condemn her to be left alone, poor and joyless and broken in health, the widow of a secret murderer and caitiff. Arnvid answered doubtfully, But I think it is not certain. Quite certain it cannot be that the bishop could not find a way out, since this happened years ago, and no innocent man has suffered for the misdeed. And the dead man had done you grievous harm, and you fought together. Mayhap the bishop will find a means of reconciling you with Christ, give you absolution, without demanding that you accuse yourself of the slaying also before human justice. That can scarce be likely. I don't know, said Arnvid quietly. I cannot venture it. Too much is at stake for those whom it is my duty to protect. Then all that I have done to save her honour might as well have been undone. Don't you think I did not know that had I proclaimed the slaying then and there, it would have been nothing but a small matter? The man was of no account, alive or dead, and had you then backed me and witnessed she was mine, the woman he had seduced. But Ingunn would not have been equal to it. She could face so little always. And then, is every mother's son in these parts to hear this of her now that she is worn out? It was a little while before Arnvid could answer. It is a question, he said in a low voice, whether she could face the other thing better. Should it go with her this time, as all the other times, that she lose her child again? A quiver passed over Olaf's features. However that may be, she is not fit to go through it many times more. You must not speak like that, whispered Olaf. Then there is Eirik, he began again after a pause. This promise I have made to God himself, that Eirik should be treated as my own son. Do you think, asked Arnvid, that it avails you to offer God this and that, promise him all that he has never asked of you, when you withhold from him the only thing you yourself know that he would beg of you? The only thing? But that is everything, Arnvid. honour, life, maybe. God knows I fear not so much to lose it in other ways, but to lose it as a caitiff. Nevertheless, you have nothing that you have not received from God, and he himself submitted to the caitiff's death to atone for all our sins. Olaf closed his eyes. Nevertheless, I cannot, he said almost inaudibly. Arnvid rejoined, You spoke of Eirik. Don't you know, Olaf? You have not the right to act in this way, to make a promise to set aside an heir, since by so doing you play your kinsman false. Olaf frowned in anger. Those men of Hvit, I have never seen them, and they did not deal by me as kinsmen when I was young and had sore need of their coming forward. They came forward after you had fled to Sweden, and they might just as well have stayed where they were, for all the good I had of them. No, then I should rather let her son take Hestviken. That will not make wrong right, Olaf, and neither you nor she can know whether it will tend to the boy's happiness that you two make him a gift which he has no right to receive. Oh, yes, I thought as much. She has been talking to you of what is in her head, that I hate her child and wish him ill. It is not true, he said hotly. I have never had anything else in mind for Eirik but his own good. It is she who corrupts him. She trains him to be afraid of me, to lie and sneak out of my way. On seeing the expression in Arnvid's face, he shook his head. No, I don't blame her for that. Ingunn doesn't know any better, poor woman. I have not changed my mind either, Arnvid. Do you remember? I promised you once that I would never fail your kinswoman, and I have never regretted it. In whatever shape my last hour may come, I shall thank God that he held my hand when I was tempted to do harm to her, showed me, before it was too late, that I must protect and support her as well as I was able. Even if I had come back and found her stricken with leprosy, I could have done no less than remember that she was my dearest friend, the only friend I had in all the years I was a child, and brought up among strangers. Arnvid said calmly, If you think, Olaf, that it would make it easier for you to judge what you ought to do in order to make your peace with God, should you be unable to care for those belonging to you, I promise to be as a brother to Ingunn, to provide for her and the boy. I shall take them under my roof if need be. But you have given up Mickelbo to Magnus, and you yourself will go into a convent. Olaf said it almost with a touch of scorn. But I have not parted from my whole estate. And if I have endured the world for so long, I doubt not I can endure it to my dying day, if it must be, while my near kinsfolk need me by them. No, said Olaf as before. I will not have you think of the like for my sake, or for the sake of any who are properly in my care. Arnvid sat gazing into the dying embers on the hearth, feeling the presence of his friend in the gloom. I wonder if he does not see himself that it is no small burden he has thrown upon me tonight, he thought. Olaf pulled a stool toward him with his foot and sat down by the hearth, facing his friend. Now I have told you much, but not that which I had it in my mind to say. I have told you that I yearn day and night to be reconciled with the Lord Christ. I have told you that never did our Lord seem to me so lovable beyond all measure as when I knew that he had marked me with the brand of Cain. But I marvel that I yearn so, for never have I seen him so hard upon other men as upon me. I have wrought this one misdeed. And then I was so incensed that I did not know, that I do not now recall what were my thoughts at the time. But I did it because I judged that it would be even worse for Ingunn if I did not do it. I would save a poor remnant of respect for her, even if it cost me a murder. And then it all came about as easily as if it had been laid out for me. He begged me to take him on that journey. No man was aware that we set out together. But had God or my patron or Mary Virgin directed our way to someone's house that evening, and not to those deserted satyrs under Luras, you know it would have fallen out otherwise. I scarce think you had prayed God and the saints to watch over your journey before you set out. I am not so sure that I did not. Nay, prayed I had not, truly. But all that Easter I had done nothing but pray, and I was so loath to kill him all the time. But it was as though all things favoured me, so that I was driven to do it, and tempted to conceal it afterward. And God, who knows all, he knew how this must turn out better than I. Why could he not have checked me, nevertheless, without my prayers? We all say that, Olaf, when we have accomplished our purpose, and then see that it would have been better if we had not. But beforehand, I'm sure you think like the rest of us, that you are the best judge of your own good. Yes, but in everything else, beyond what this deed has brought in its train, I have dealt uprightly with every man to the best of my power. I have no goods in my possession that were come by unjustly, so far as I know. I have not spread ill report of man or woman, but have let all such talk fall to the ground when it reached my door, even though I knew it to be true and no lie. I have been faithful to my wife, and it is not as she thinks that I bear the boy ill will. I have been as good to Eirik as most men are to their own sons. Tell me, Arnvid, you who understand these things better than I, you have been a pious man all the days of your life and have shown compassion to all. Am I not right when I say that God is harder upon me than upon other men? I have seen more of the world than you. Arnvid was sitting so that Olaf could not see him smile at those words. In the years when I was an outlaw, with my uncle, and afterward when I was the Earl's liege man, I have seen men who loaded themselves with all the 7 deadly sins, who committed such cruel deeds as I would not set my hand to, even if I knew of a surety that God had already cast me off and doomed me to hell. They were not afraid of God, and I never marked that they thought of him with love or longing to obtain his forgiveness. And yet they lived in joy and contentment, and they had a good death, many of them, as I have myself seen. Then why can we have no peace or joy, she and I? It is as though God pursued me wherever I go, vouchsafing me no peace or rest, but demanding of me such impossible things as I have never seen him demand of other men. How should I be able to give you answers to such questions? I, a layman. Olaf, can you not go with me to the town and speak with Brother Vigard of this? Maybe I will do so, said Olaf in a low voice. But you must tell me first. Can you understand why it is to be made so much harder for me than for other men? You do not know everything about the other men you speak of, but you must be able to see that if you feel that God pursues you, it is because he would not lose you. But he has so ordered it for me that I cannot turn about. Surely it was not God who ordered it so for you? No, but I have not brought it about myself either. I had to do what I did, it seems to me. Ingunn's life and welfare were laid in my hands. But that which was the cause of all this, Arnvid, that the Steinfinnsons would steal from me the marriage that had been promised to my father, should I have been content with that, bowed before such injustice? I have never heard anything else but that God commands every Christian man to fight against wrong and law-breaking. I was a child in years, unlearned in the law. I knew no other way to defend my right than to take my bride myself, before they could give her to another. Arnvid said reluctantly, "That was the answer you gave me when I spoke to you of your dealings with my kinswoman. Do you remember, Olaf, that you did not speak the truth that time?" Olaf raised his head with a jerk, taken by surprise. He paused a moment with his reply. "No." "And I believe," he said calmly, "most men would have done the same in my place. That is for sure." "Do you think," asked Olaf scornfully, "that God's hand has pressed so hard upon me and upon her because I lied that time to you?" "I cannot tell." Olaf gave a fretful toss of his head. "I cannot believe that it was so grievous a sin. So many a man have I heard tell worse lies, needlessly, and never did I see that God raised a finger to chastise him. So I cannot understand his justice, which deals so hardly with me." Arnvid whispered, "You must have petty thoughts of God, if you expect his justice to be the same as man's. Not two of us outlawed children of Eve did he create alike. Should he then demand the same fruits of all his creatures, to whom he has given such diverse talents? When first I knew you in our youth, I judged you to be most truthful, upright, and generous. There was no cruelty or deceit in you, but God had given you a heritage of brave and faithful ancestors." Olaf rose to his feet in violent agitation. "I think that if it were so, if it is as you say, and truly I have often shrunk from doing what other men do every day, without a care for small matters, I think that what you call God's gifts might just as well be called a burden not to be borne, which he laid upon my back when he created me." Arnvid leapt up in his turn. He moved forward to the other and stood before him, almost threateningly. So many a man may say that of the nature he was given. Unless he have a faith firm as a rock in his Redeemer, he must think himself born the most unfortunate of men. He put his foot on the edge of the hearth. With his hand resting on his knee, he stood bending forward and looked down at the embers. "You often wondered that I longed to turn my back upon the world, I who had riches in abundance, and more power than I cared to use, and some respect withal. Pious, you say I have been, and compassionate to all. God knows if you do not think that it must be because I love my Christians. I believed you helped every man who sought your aid because you were meek of heart and pitied everyone who was in any difficulty." "Pitied? Oh, yes. Many a time I was tempted to reproach my Creator, because he had made me so that I could do nothing else. I had to pity everyone, though I could love none of them." "I believed," said Olaf very low, "that you supported me and Ingunn with deed and counsel because you were our friend. Was it only for God's sake you held your hand over us?" Arnvid shook his head. "It was not. I was fond of you from our childhood, and Ingunn has been dear to me since she was a little maid. Nevertheless, I was often so mortally weary of all this. It came over me that I desired more than all else to be rid, once and for all, of this suit of yours." "You might have let me know this," said Olaf stiffly. "Then I should have troubled you far less." Again Arnvid shook his head. "It is you and Ingunn who were my best friends. But I am not pious, and I am not good. And often I was weary of it all, wished I could transform myself and become a hard man, if I could not be meek and let God judge mankind, not me. There was once a holy man in France, an anchorite. He had taken upon himself a work of charity for the love of God, that he would harbour folk who fared through the forest where he dwelt. One night there came a beggar who sought shelter with the anchorite. Julian was his name, I think. The stranger was full of leprosy, grievously tainted with the sickness, gross and foul of mouth, returned ill thanks for all the kindness the anchorite showed him. Then Julian undressed the beggar, washed and tended his sores and kissed them, put him to bed. But the beggar made as though he was cold and bade Julian lie close and warm him. Julian did so. But then his foulness and ugliness and evil speech slipped from the stranger as it were a disguise, and Julian saw that he had embraced Christ himself. It has been my lot that, when I thought I could not bear all these folk who came to me, lied, and threw the burden of their affairs on me, begged advice, and acted as seemed good to themselves, but blamed me when things went wrong, greedy and envious of every one they thought had been better helped, it was borne in upon me that they must be disguised, and that under the disguise it would one day be granted to me to see my Saviour and my friend himself. And indeed it was so in a way, since he said that everything ye do unto one of my little ones. But never would he throw off the disguise and appear to me in the person of any of them. Olaf seated himself on the stool again, hiding his face in his arms. Arnvid said in a yet lower voice, "Do you remember, Olaf, what Einar Kolbeinsson said that evening? The words that goaded me so that I drew my weapon upon him?" Olaf nodded. "You were so young at that time. I didn't know whether you had guessed their meaning." "I guessed it later." "And afterward, those rumours of Ingunn and me?" "Halvard said something of that when I was north to fetch the boy." Arnvid drew a couple of deep breaths. "I am not so holy but that I took it greatly to heart, both one thing and the other. And I often thought God might have granted me my only prayer, given me leave to serve him in such guise that I dared work deeds of compassion, as far as I was able, without folk whispering behind my back and defaming me, or calling me a sanctimonious fool, or believe the worst of me, because I took myself neither wife nor leman after Tordis's death." He struck out with his fist and brought it down on the other hand with a crack. "Often I had a good mind to take my axe and make an end of the whole pack." Thereafter, during the 2 days Arnvid yet stayed at Hestviken, the friends were shy and taciturn with each other. It pained them both that they had said far too much that evening. Now it seemed they could not talk freely of the simplest trifles. Olaf rode with Arnvid a part of the way up the fjord, but when they were halfway to the town, he said he must turn back. He drew out something from the folds of his kirtle, a hard thing wrapped in a linen cloth. Arnvid could feel that it must be the silver cup which Olaf had shown him a day or two before. Olaf said he was to give it to the convent at Hamar. "But so great a gift, you ought to place yourself in the hands of Brother Vigard," said Arnvid. Olaf replied that he must be home that evening. "But it may be that I can come to Oslo one day to greet him." Arnvid said, "You know full well, Olaf, that it is vain to seek to buy your atonement with gifts, so long as you live as you do now." "I know it, but it is not for that. I had a mind to give to their church. Many a happy hour I had in the old Olaf's church. So they bade each other farewell and rode their ways. Olaf did not come to Oslo. Arnvid spoke with Brother Vigard about it, saying that he was doubtless unwilling to come while Ingunn was unfit to accompany him. But she had grieved so much that she could not see the instructor of her youth while he dwelt so near. Arnvid proposed that the monk should borrow a sled and drive south to Hestviken one day. Brother Vigard was well-minded to make the journey, but he had been so unwell and full of rheum ever since he came to Oslo. By Peter's Mass, a hard frost set in. A few days after, the old man fell suddenly sick of a fever in the lungs, and died the third night. Thereafter, Arnvid had to deal single-handed with the hiring of the stonemasons, and it took up all his time, until he had to take the north road again. Olaf got Ingunn to keep her bed in the daytime when the weather turned so cold. She was scarcely able to move now, so far gone was she, and then her feet were frostbitten, so that there were great open holes in the flesh. Olaf tended them himself and smeared fox's fat and swine's gall on the sores. Ever since Arnvid's departure he had been gentle and solicitous with his wife. He had quite put off the cross and unfriendly air he had shown her during the autumn and winter. Ingunn lay huddled under the skins, whispering a little word of humble thanks whenever Olaf did anything for her. She had bowed beneath his displeasure and harsh words, silent and submissive. Now she accepted his affectionate care with almost the same dumb meekness. Olaf kept an eye on her, as she lay motionless hour after hour, staring out into the room almost without blinking, and the old wild fear rose up in his heart, as hot as ever. It was no matter if he had neither use nor joy of her. He could not lose her. Ingunn was glad to be allowed to creep this way into hiding. She had come to feel it as an unbearable disgrace every time she was to have a child. Even before she had her first two, she had been distressed and shy, because it made her so ugly. Dala's insults had bitten into her mind so that she never got over them. She winced when she had to appear before Olaf, and when he was away from her, she felt as though she could not sustain herself without his sound health close at hand to draw strength from. But as time went on, and it proved that she could not bring into life a single one of these creatures who came and dwelt in her, one after the other, she was filled with a horror of her own body. She must be marked in some mysterious way, with something as terrible as leprosy, so that she infected her unborn infants with death. Her blood and marrow were spent, her youth and charm wasted long ago by these uncanny guests who lived their hidden life beneath her heart for a while and then went out, until she felt the first warning grip as of a claw in her back, and then had to let herself be led by strange women to the little house on the east of the courtyard, give herself into their hands without daring to show a sign of the mortal dread that filled her heart. And when she had fought through it, she lay back, empty of blood and empty of everything. The child was, as it were, swallowed up by the night, taken back into a gloom where she had not even a name or a memory to look for. The last premature births the women had not even let her see. And yet she sometimes thought that it was even worse with Audun. When she lost the year-old child, he had already shown in many ways that he knew her for his mother. He would not be with anyone else than her, and he was so fond of her. But he must be so still. When they sang in the litany, Omni sancti innocentes, orati pro nobis, Audun was one of them. In purgatory she would know that Audun was one of the holy innocents who prayed for her. And when her hour of grace arrived, perhaps our Lord himself, or his blessed mother, would say to Audun, "Run down now and meet your mother." How it might go with her this time, She tried hard not to think. But when the men came in at meal times, Olaf and Eirik together, a deep uneasy tension came to life in the sick woman's great lustreless eyes. Olaf noticed how wide awake she was, watching every movement of his features, listening to every word he spoke when he was with the boy. And he always kept a guard over himself, taking care not to show it when he was impatient or annoyed with Eirik. The boy was troublesome enough. Olaf liked him but moderately, now that he was big enough to show his nature. Noisy, full of boasting and idle tales, he chatted more than becomes a youth. Not even when the men sat over their food, tired and worn out, could Eirik keep his mouth shut. There was that Arnketel, or Anki as they called him. Olaf had had him in his service some 6 years, and the man was now well on in his 20s. But he had poor parts, might indeed be called almost half-witted, though he was useful for many kinds of work. He had always been Eirik's best friend. They quarrelled, half in jest, raising their voices, till Eirik flew at Anki as he sat on the bench, pushing and pulling him till he got him to join in the game. They thrust each other hither and thither about the room, laughing and screaming, and shouting without a thought of the other men who sat there and wanted rest and quiet. Grossly disobedient he was too, whether his father taught him something or forbade him to do this or that. He forgot it at once. And Olaf was angry that Eirik did not show his mother more affection. He was himself aware of the unreasonableness of this. Formerly he had felt a secret exasperation when he knew that mother and son clung together behind his back. But now it made him angry to see Eirik spend the whole day out of doors among the men, never going in to sit by his sick mother. Olaf himself had taught the boy his prayers some years ago, when he saw that Ingunn did not seem to think it was yet time. Now he made Eirik say a paternoster and 3 aves for his mother every evening, when he had prayed for himself. The boy gabbled off his prayers while his father stood over him. Eirik rose to his feet before he had finished the last ave. At In nomine he was up on the bed, hastily crossed himself, and plunged headlong beneath the skins in the northern bed, which he shared with his father. He was asleep in an instant, and when Olaf had finished smearing Ingunn's feet, he found Eirik curled up in the middle of the bed, so that he had to straighten him out and push him against the wall to make room for himself. At times Olaf felt a stab of pain when Eirik sought him out with his foolish talk, boasting of his little unhandy attempts to make himself useful among the men. If only the boy had been so that I could have liked him, he thought. In his innocent stupidity, Eirik seemed never to guess that his father was not so fond of his company as he was of his father's. But Olaf had taken his resolution. He had acknowledged this child and raised him up in order to set him in the high seat here at Hestviken in succession to himself, though God knew Eirik was unpromising material for a great franklin and the head of a manor. The boy seemed to be a loose-tongued chatterer, untruthful, boasting, cowardly, lacking in hardiness, and born with little sense of seemliness and quiet good manners. But Olaf would have to do what he could to teach Eirik good behaviour and drive the bad habits out of him, even if he had to let the discipline wait till Ingunn was stronger, so that the lad might learn to comport himself as became Eirik Olafsson of Hestviken. Some years before, herds of deer had moved into the districts on the west side of the Oslo fjord, and there were now not a few deer on Olaf's land. They were to be found up in Ferndal, on the ridge of the Bull, and in Olaf's oak wood, which lay inland toward the church town. The summer before they had grown so much fodder in Hestviken that they had stacks of hay and dried leaves standing in the open. Now, in late winter, the deer came as far as the manor in the early morning to snatch what they could of the fodder. Hiding behind some timber that lay in the yard, Olaf one morning shot a fine young stag of 10 points. Eirik was then quite wild to go with him. He would bring down a stag too. Olaf laughed a little at the boy's chatter. The next few days the wind was off the fjord, and he made Anki go out in the morning, so that the deer might get scent of him and keep off the hay, and Eirik was allowed to go with him. The boy lay stiff with cold, with bow and spear by him, but when he came in he made out that he had both seen and heard the red deer. Then one night Olaf woke up and went to the outer door to see the time. It was 2 hours to daybreak, intensely cold and dead calm, with the faintest breath from the east down Kvøndal. In the early morning the deer would certainly come down and take tithe of the stacks. Olaf dressed in the dark, but in order to choose his arrows he had to light a torch. That waked Eirik, and the end of it was that his father gave him leave to go with him, but he was not allowed a weapon. As soon as they had crept into hiding behind the timber stacks, Olaf had hard work to keep the boy quiet. Eirik forgot himself every minute and would whisper. Then he fell asleep. He had on a thick leathern jacket of his father's. Olaf wrapped it well about the child so that he should not get frostbit. It was bitterly cold just before dawn, and he thought with satisfaction that now Eirik could do no harm. Olaf had a long time to wait. The eastern sky was already turning yellow above the forest when he espied the deer coming out of the thicket. 4 dark spots moved against the dun-coloured ground. Patches of it were clear of snow. Now and again they stopped, looked about and sniffed the air. Now he could see that they were a stag, 2 does, and a calf. Excitement and joy warmed his stiffened body as he rose on one knee, took his bow, and laid an arrow to the string. He held his breath. The stag came on, proud and stately. Now he saw it against a snowdrift. It climbed onto an old balk of sods, stood there with feet close together, the neck and head with the antlers showing clearly against the yellow sky. Olaf gave a noiseless gasp of joy. He had not met this old fellow before. A mighty beast, full-shouldered, with a great crown of antlers, 15 or 16 points, no less. It moved its head this way and that, spying out. It was a rather long shot, but the target was just right. Olaf took his aim, and his heart laughed with joy. He felt, too, that Eirik was on the point of waking. The boy started up with a shout. He, too, had seen those glorious horns against the sky. Olaf sent his arrow after the flying deer, chanced to graze the shoulder, making the stag leap high into the air. It went on in flying leaps, and the whole herd disappeared in the thicket. Eirik received a couple of hearty cuffs on the side of the head. He took them with a little gasp and did not cry out. He had wit enough to be ashamed of what he had done. Besides, the thick leather cap he wore must have deadened the blows. "Say nothing to your mother about this," said Olaf, as they went back to the houses. "She doesn't need to know that you can behave yourself like an untaught puppy, old as you are." Later in the day Olaf followed the blood tracks of the stag with his hound, found the deer and killed it on the hillside at the top of Kvøndal. And when the quarry was brought home at evening, Eirik went about boasting. It was he who had warned his father when the great stag came within range. Olaf did not care to say a word to the boy. He was afraid of losing his temper. The seal now came in thickly on the approach of spring, and the farmers of the country round took their boats out to the edge of the ice and went seal hunting in the south of the fjord. Olaf let Eirik go with him, but the result was not very happy. The massacre of seals and the brisk life among the hunters made him wild with excitement. It seemed quite incredible that the boy should have so little idea of how to behave anywhere in seemly fashion. But on coming home again, he had the most extraordinary tales to tell. It was not easy for Olav to listen to the boy's talk without losing patience. The second week of March brought a change of weather, southerly winds and rain. This was thought to presage a good year both on land and sea. On the morrow, Ingunn was lying alone in the house early in the day. It was fairly dark indoors, for the smoke vent was closed. It was raining outside. Olav came in. He sat down on the bench, drew off his boots, struggled out of his jerkin and shirt, and opened his clothes chest to find other garments. "Are you asleep, Ingunn?" he asked with his back toward her. "How is it with you?" he said, when she whispered in reply. No, she was not asleep. "Oh, I am well. Are you riding out?" Olav said yes, the thing at Vidans was summoned for today. He came up to the bed, naked to the waist, and put one foot on the step. "Do I have to change my hose, do you think?" Ingunn involuntarily drew her head away. "Indeed you must. They smell so ill." "They will scarce smell sweeter, the other men who come there. We have been out seal hunting day and night of late, all of us." "But you might meet strangers from other parts," suggested Ingunn. "All right, as you will." He drew off his breeks and hose, stood quite naked, stretched himself and yawned. The sight of his faultlessly shaped body hurt her. It made her own ravaged wretchedness so hopeless. That time was so impossibly long past when she had been young and lovely, when they were well matched. But Olav was yet a young man, sound and handsome. His muscles were more knotted than of old, chiefly about the shoulder blades and upper arms. They moved freely and powerfully as he stretched himself, raising his arms and lowering them. His flesh was still white as milk. He came back to his wife when he had put on his red woolen shirt, long hose of black leather and linen breeks. "Then I must wear the blue kirtle too, do you think, since you will have me so tricked out?" he asked with a smile. "Olav!" As he bent over her, she suddenly threw her thin arms around his neck and drew him down to her, pressing her face against his cheek. Olav felt that she was trembling. "What is it?" he whispered. She only clung to him and made no answer. "Are you sick?" He loosed her arms from about his neck. It was so uncomfortable to stand bent double. "Would you rather I stayed home today? I can ride to Ringel and fetch Una to you. At the same time, ask Torgrim to speak for me at Vidans." "No, no." She pressed his hand hard in hers. "No, there will be no change with me till mid-spring be past. But stay with me a little while." It came as a faint moan. "Sit here a little while, if you have the time." "That I may well do." He held her hand, stroking her arm. "What is it with you, Ingunn? Are you so afraid?" he asked quietly. "No. Yes. No. I don't know that I am so afraid, but—" Olav pushed the step out of his way, sat on the edge of the bed and patted her wasted cheek time after time. "I had a dream," whispered his wife softly, "just before you came in." "Was it an evil dream, then?" The tears began to pour down her cheeks, but she wept without a sound. Only her voice was more veiled and broken. "It didn't seem evil while I dreamt it. Then it was not so evil. I saw you, walking along a path in a forest. You looked happy and seemed younger than you are now. You sang as you walked. I saw you here, too, at Hestviken, out in the yard, and it was the same. You looked happy and well. I could see it all, but it was as though I myself was not. I was dead, I knew. And I didn't see any children here. Not one. Ingunn, Ingunn, you must not lie here thinking such things. He knelt down so that he could get his arm under her shoulder. There would be little joy for me here in our house were I to lose you, Ingunn mine. A joy for you I have never been. You are the only friend I have. He kissed her, bending lower over his wife, so that her face was quite hidden against his breast. It might be, now, as Signy and Una say, he whispered, hesitating, that you are to have a daughter this year. They were all sons till now, but a little maid, maybe her God would let us keep. The sick woman sighed. I am so weary. Olaf whispered, Have you never thought, Ingunn, that maybe I have paid Eirik no more than the price of his father's slaying? As he received no answer, he asked her, and he could not make his voice sound quite firm. Have you never wondered what became of that teat? She clasped him closer. I never believed that you did it. The man felt strangely overpowered, as though he had suddenly come into a bright light and were trying to distinguish things in it. She had known it all the time. But what did that mean? Had she guessed what was on his mind? Or had she been afraid of his blood-stained hands? Ingunn turned her face to his, clasped his neck, and drew his head down to her. She kissed him on the lips with a wild gulp. I knew it. Yet I was afraid sometimes, when things were at their worst with me, and I almost lost heart. I could not help it. I thought, what if he were alive and came after me, avenged himself? But indeed I believed you had done it, and I could feel safe from him. Olaf had a queer feeling, as though numb or frozen. Was that what she had thought? Well, perhaps that was all she could take in, poor thing. He kissed her again, a gentle little kiss. Then he said, with a laugh of embarrassment, You must let me go now, Ingunn. You will break my ribs against the bedposts soon. He got up, patted her cheek once more, and crossed the room to his chest, searched among the clothes. Then he asked again, Are you sure, Ingunn, that you would not rather I stayed home today? No, no, Olaf. I will not keep you. Olaf buckled on his spurs, took his sword, and threw his rain-cloak of thick felted homespun over his shoulder. He was already at the door when he turned and came back to her bed. Ingunn could see that a change had come over him, and he was not as she had seen him for a long, long time. His face was still as a rock, his lips pale, his eyes veiled and unseeing. He spoke as though in his sleep. Will you promise me one thing? Should it go with you, as you said, should it cost you your life this time, will you give me your promise that you will come back to me? He looked at her, bending slightly toward her. You must promise me, Ingunn. If it is so that the dead may come back to the living, then you must come back to me. Yes. The man bent down hastily, touching her breast with his forehead an instant. You are the only friend I have had, he whispered, quickly and shyly. Olaf came riding home late in the evening, wet and so cold that he could not feel his feet in the stirrups. His horse trotted wearily, splashing the snow slush over him at every beat of the hoofs. Clouds and fog rolled over the landscape. The earth breathed moisture. It was an evening of steaminess and mist, the whole world strangely dissolved, forest and field bare and dark in patches among the melting snow. The fjord spoke in dull surf beats with long intervals, like a sluggish pulse, but the stream in Verndal roared with a glut of water. A sigh went through the woods as the firs shed their snow, and water purled and gurgled everywhere in the dusk. The cold scent from the fields and the sea brought the first reminder of springtime and growth. On the hillside by the barn a dark figure came towards him, a woman in a hooded cloak. "Welcome home, Olaf." It was Sigrid Undset. She hurried to meet him as he drew nearer. "Ah, now Ingunn is over it for this time. She does better than we had looked for." Olaf had reined in his horse, and Sigrid caressed its muzzle. "And the child is so big and fine. None of us has ever seen so big and fair a newborn babe. So you must bear with it, that it is not a son." Olaf thanked her for the good news, feeling that, had he been as in his younger years, he would have leapt from his horse, embraced his kinswoman, and kissed her. He was relieved, and he was glad, but as yet he did not feel it to the full. Then he thanked Sigrid again for the kindness she had shown once more to Ingunn. It had come upon her so suddenly, said Sigrid, that they had not been able to take her out to the women's house. Olaf would have to put up with sleeping in the closet, while they had the cradle and kept watch in the great room. But in a moment he saw Ingunn herself. Her face shone snow-white as she lay on her side, with one light brown plait showing from under her cheek. Una knelt behind her in the bed, plaiting her other thick rope of hair. The other times Olaf had seen her lying thus, she had been ugly, swollen and blotched in the face. But now she was unlike herself, marvellously fair, as if an unearthly light was shed upon her white and wasted countenance. Her great dark blue eyes glittered like starlight mirrored in a well, and the thought sank into the man that a miracle had taken place. Sigrid came with a little bundle, white swaddling bands wound crosswise about the leaf-green woolen wrapper. She laid the child in Olaf's arm. "Have you ever seen so fair a maid, kinsman?" And again it was as though he had fallen among incredible things. A girl's face, impossibly small, but perfect, the fairest. A newborn life, and it could look like that. Her eyes were open, dark they were, and bottomless, and she was red and white like a briar rose, and had nose and mouth like a human being, but so small that he could not understand it. Sigrid drew the swaddling cloth aside, so that the father might see that she had fine hair too. Olaf cupped his hand under the delicate round head. It lay in his palm, no larger than an apple, and as sweet and soft to hold. Olaf still held his little daughter in his hands. A gift she was. It softened him. So grateful beyond measure he had never been before. He laid his face against the baby's breast. Her face was so pure and fine that he durst not touch it. Una leapt to the floor, arranged Ingunn on her back with the plaits over her bosom. They took the child from him, and he sat down on the edge of the bed by his wife. He held her hand in his for a while, and took up one of her plaits. Neither of them said anything. Then a maid came in with food and drink for him, and afterwards they said that he must go into the closet and lie down. Ingunn needed sleep. Then she called to him softly. "Olaf," she whispered, "there is one thing I would beg of you, husband." At other times she never called him that. "Will you do what I ask of you?" "I will do everything you ask of me." He smiled as in pain, so undermanned was he by his joy. "Promise me that she shall not be called after my mother. I want her named Cecilia." Olaf nodded. He lay awake in the darkness. Against the wall Eirik was sleeping like a stone. Through the door opening he could see the reflection of fire flickering on the logs of the wall. It rose and sank. But the holy candle burning beside the mother and child shed a mild and golden light. The watching women whispered and went about their work, clattering with the kettle and the pothook. Once the newborn child began to cry, and her cries called to his heart. He listened to her and was tender and happy. The women got onto their feet. The cradle was set rocking, and Signy sang softly. Here he lay before her door. It seemed as natural as a dream that he should lie and listen while they watched over her sleep. Ingunn slept sweetly now. She had given birth to a child, and now she was to take a long rest that would make her young and healthy and happy again. A child had been born here in his house, the first one. All that had gone before had been as one endless, unnatural sickness, an uncanny spell upon the unhappy woman. The little lifeless deformities that the women had brought to him that he might see them, though he was so loath to do so, the sight of them had filled him with infinite disgust. And the poor little abortion that had lived his brief, tormented life, until God had pity on him and took him to himself, in his heart he had never been able to acknowledge that these were his children, the fruit of his and Ingunn's bodies. Never had he known how it felt to be a father, until now, when he had a daughter, a treasure like this little Cecilia.